Most people spend their whole lives fighting the wrong battle. They argue, they defend themselves, they try to prove themselves. They think strength means pushing harder than everyone else. But the people who quietly shape outcomes are often doing something different. They are not fighting the game, they are watching it. And once you see the game for what it is, something changes. You stop taking every word seriously. You stop chasing every approval. You stop getting trapped by every emotional reaction. Because you finally realize that what people say is only one part of the story. The real story is hidden underneath. And that is where power lives. Most people never notice this. That is why they keep losing battles they do not even understand. The invisible game begins with a simple mistake. People assume that words are reality. Someone says they support you. You believe them. Someone says they respect you. You believe that too. Someone promises loyalty. Again, you believe it. But life has a strange way of teaching the same lesson over and over. Words are easy, patterns are expensive. A person can tell you almost anything. Their behavior tells you what they truly value. And yet most people spend years listening to speeches while ignoring evidence. That is why they become confused when people suddenly change. The truth is that most people never changed. The signs were there all along. The game was visible. They simply were not looking at the right place. The first lesson Machiavelli understood is that people often reveal themselves through repetition. Not once, not twice, but over time. A single action can be an accident. A pattern is a message, and once you understand that, many things start making sense. You stop asking why certain outcomes keep happening. You start noticing the behavior that created them. Most defeats begin long before the final moment. They begin when people ignore what is right in front of them. A coworker agrees with everyone in every meeting. They smile. They avoid conflict. They appear harmless. Then, months later, they somehow end up closer to the people making decisions. Everyone is surprised. But the pattern was visible from the beginning. While others focused on conversation, they focused on position. While others chased attention, they built influence. The game was never about being the loudest person in the room. It was about understanding where power flows. That realization changes everything. Because suddenly you stop judging situations by appearances. You start asking different questions. Who benefits? Who gains influence? Who keeps repeating the same behavior? And what does that behavior reveal? Most people never ask these questions. They react emotionally instead. That is why they become easy to control. The person who reacts instantly is predictable. A predictable person is easy to manipulate. The game rewards observation, not reaction. This is where many people lose. They believe every challenge requires an immediate response. Someone insults them, they react. Someone provokes them, they react. Someone spreads rumors, again, they react. Someone spreads rumors, again, they react. But every reaction gives information. Every emotional response reveals where your buttons are. And once someone knows your buttons, they know how to move you. That is why awareness is more powerful than speed. The person who pauses sees things. The reactive person misses. The person who observes notices motives before they become actions. The person who understands patterns avoids traps before they close. And that is a completely different kind of strength. If learning to see what most people miss is valuable to you, Illu Codex is built for that kind of thinking, because the deeper you look, the more you realize that human behavior follows patterns far more often than people admit. Now comes a deeper layer of the game, the language behind behavior. Most people think communication happens through words, but words are only one channel. Behavior is another, and behavior is usually more honest. Someone repeatedly interrupts you. Someone constantly takes credit for group success. Someone only appears when they need something. These are not random events. They are signals. The problem is that many people ignore signals because they prefer stories. Stories feel comfortable. Signals require observation, and observation often reveals things we do not want to see. That is why manipulation works so well, not because it is invisible, but because people prefer comforting explanations over uncomfortable truths. Think about someone who repeatedly crosses your boundaries. Each time they apologize, each time they promise change, and each time the behavior returns. The words create hope. The pattern creates truth. Most people focus on hope. Strategic people focus on truth. That small difference changes entire lives, because when you begin trusting patterns more than promises, confusion starts disappearing. Suddenly people's actions become easier to understand. Their motives become easier to predict. Their intentions become harder to hide, and the game becomes visible. Have you ever trusted someone's words and later realized their actions told a completely different story? That moment is often the beginning of real awareness, because awareness rarely arrives through comfort. It usually arrives through disappointment. And if you pay attention, disappointment often carries valuable information. The next lesson is even more important. Power rarely looks powerful. Movies teach people that power is obvious. Reality teaches the opposite. The strongest influence often appears ordinary. The most effective control often looks harmless. The people shaping outcomes are not always the loudest voices. Sometimes they are the quiet observers, the people collecting information, the people understanding relationships, the people recognizing weaknesses. While others chase attention, they study behavior. While others fight visible battles, they prepare for invisible ones. This is why so many people misunderstand power. They look for force. But force is often the last tool. Real influence begins much earlier. It begins with understanding people, understanding what they fear, understanding what they want, understanding what drives their decisions. Because once you understand those things, you stop guessing. You start predicting. And prediction creates advantage. That does not mean becoming paranoid. It means becoming aware. There is a difference. Paranoia assumes everyone is against you. Awareness simply sees reality more clearly. One creates fear, the other creates freedom. And freedom is where the game starts changing. Because eventually a moment arrives. A strange moment, a quiet moment, a moment where you stop seeing isolated events and start seeing connections. The board becomes visible. You notice why certain people always end up in positions of influence. You notice why some conflicts repeat themselves. You notice why emotional people keep getting pulled into the same traps. And you notice something even more important. The people who understand the game are rarely the people making the most noise. They are usually the people making the fewest mistakes. That is because awareness removes many unnecessary battles. You stop trying to win every argument. You stop needing everyone to understand you. You stop wasting energy proving your value. You become more selective, more patient, more difficult to manipulate. Because manipulation depends on blindness. Once awareness enters the room, many tactics lose their power. Guilt loses power when you recognize it. Pressure loses power when you understand it. Provocation loses power when you expect it. The game cannot surprise you in the same way anymore, and that changes how you move through the world. If these ideas are helping you see things differently, consider subscribing to Codex. Not for motivation, for awareness. Because awareness often creates changes that motivation never can. Now we arrive at the final realization, the one most people spend years searching for. Nothing can defeat what it can no longer fool. Read that again. Nothing can defeat what it can no longer fool. Most defeats begin with deception. Not necessarily deception from others, sometimes deception from ourselves. We ignore patterns, we ignore signals, we ignore reality. Then reality eventually forces itself into view, but the moment you begin seeing clearly, the game changes. You stop giving power away through blind trust. You stop surrendering control through emotional reactions. You stop confusing appearances with truth. And something remarkable happens. You become harder to move. Not because you are stronger than everyone else, not because you are smarter than everyone else, but because you are seeing more than you saw before. That awareness creates a quiet advantage, a cold advantage, the kind that does not need attention, the kind that does not need validation, the kind that simply understands what is happening beneath the surface. What was the moment in your life when you realized people were playing a different game than the one they talked about? Think about it carefully, because that moment may have taught you more than years of advice ever could. The weak mindset believes strength comes from force. The stronger mindset understands that strength begins with perception. One fights shadows, the other sees the source. One reacts, the other observes. One gets pulled into the game, the other understands the rules. And once you truly see the game, defeat becomes much harder, because the greatest advantage is not power, it is clarity. And the person who sees clearly is already standing where most people spend their lives trying to reach.